An anonymous ex-Volition developer has come clean about some truth behind Saints Row 2022 and shed some insight on some of the reasons why the game turned out to be such a disaster commercially and critically. The information we are about to digest from this ex-Volition employee were points taken from a video by a creator of the name Matt McMuscles. Who is this, you might ask? Well, I have no idea, but the Volition dev reached out to him to spill the beans, so let's just go with it. The original pitch way back in late 2017 was that it was going to be a sequel/reboot, but based on the ending of Saints Row 4. This would have featured the likes of the original Saints crew, you know, the ones that weren't absolutely despised. And yes, that includes Johnny Gat as well. Johnny Gat was originally going to be in the game. The premise of the game was going to involve the players rebuilding their gang empire back from scratch since they were in some sort of weird dimension/past based on the ending of Saints Row 4 when the Saints discovered they now have a time machine. There was legs to this idea, but it was never solidified. There was then a change in idea and scope at some point to just do a full-on reboot with an all-new cast, because then it would open up more story ideas, and it was seen that a fresh reboot with callbacks instead of rehashing ideas would get more people into Saints Row. Now, on the surface, that kind of makes sense. Starting fresh with new ideas would be a good way to get even more people to try out a Saints Row game, rather than rely on past storylines to carry the game, in a way alienating those who had never played a Saints Row game before. According to the anonymous source, both the higher-ups at Volition and their parent company Deep Silver signed off in agreement to this full reboot idea. But once things started going into full production, many problems came about very quickly. The writing and design team were constantly clashing with upper management with how to differentiate these new Saints from the old ones, since they didn't want to rehash the same concept of legitimate gangsters who become sellout celebrities all over again. But at the same time, they couldn't seem to nail down a proper alternative to this concept that everyone was happy with. Quote, "The writing team simply kept changing direction. It was supposed to be a simple story of how some millennial-aged adults just got into crime to pay the bills. Somehow, more pathos was added to the characters, but it was taking a long time to flesh them out. There was a lot of adjustment on the fly to simply make the story work and still make sense. Hell, whole previously unplanned missions were added into the production cycle of the game just to make the characters make more sense and hope the player would care about them more. Not sure if this worked. Some people liked the characters, but others didn't. This makes sense when you look back at the game and the absolutely random missions it threw at you in places that made no sense in the story. For example, the mission where you have to get a Happy Meal with Kevin, or the mission where you are collecting random artifacts for Nina that was just completely out of the blue. This was always going to be an uphill battle, considering starting a new cast is hard enough, but when your old cast was iconic as the OG Saints were, they really needed to deliver fleshed out characters for this game, which clearly wasn't what happened.
Oh, I love you, but I'm allergic.
Not only that, but Volition wanted the game to go back to the vibe of the first two games, where the Saints were truly gangsters doing small petty crimes, but at the same time they still wanted those immaculate set pieces that were present in SR3 and 4. Essentially, Volition was writing themselves into a corner here. The constant rewrites of the story would generally cause production of the game to come to a complete halt for months at a time. The anonymous source stated that the game was rewritten 3 to 4 times during active development. Every time that would happen, the game would be pushed back several months. For example, the very first introductory mission of the game was rewritten and changed about 4 times itself. By August of 2021, it was very clear to Volition that this game was a very far place away from where they needed to be. The game was supposed to be launched in late 2020. At this point in time in development, the new city of Santo Aliso was somewhat finished, but the game itself was not able to be completed. The anonymous source claims that this was the roughest time in the entire development cycle of the game. Quote, "No one in the studio at the time could complete the game from start to finish. It was simply too buggy. There was a mandate sent from the top that we had to fix critical areas to at least be able to make it to the end of the game without crashing. This mandate caused crunch. Lots of it. QA was crunching 50 to 60 hours a week minimum. All other departments were putting in 12-hour days, some longer. The crunch and lack of idea cohesion caused a lot of people to lose faith in the project, and the studio started bleeding people at a constant rate. 2 to 3 people a week would leave at its worst point. Obviously, with every person that left, massive swaths of institutional knowledge left with them. The teams would then have to crunch more to pick up the slack. Special shout out to the animation, cinematic, and character creation team. They were severely understaffed and unsupported for long stretches of the project. Taking all that information in really puts things into perspective on just how bad things were behind the scenes at this point. To have your game be unable to complete without crashing 1 year after the game was supposed to be launched would be an absolutely devastating feeling, and I can see why many of the developers were straight up quitting. Keep in mind, this was a game they were developing for 5 different platforms. In addition to not only the vibes around Volition at this time being at an all-time low now, with all this going on behind the scenes, including constantly disputing Deep Silver's creative decisions, the reaction to the Saints Row reboot reveal was far from positive, and that's putting it lightly. It was at this point that Deep Silver decided to tie end of project bonuses for the Volition workers, but only if the game received a virtually impossible, very high average score on Metacritic for the game. When this was revealed to Volition, they were understandably very upset, and while the anonymous source didn't state the exact Metacritic score they were taunted to hit, they did say it was high enough that pretty much everyone at Volition knew it was going to be impossible to achieve. So for Deep Silver to tie a very good amount of money for the workers and their families to a merely impossible manner seems pretty out of touch and kind of cruel, honestly. Instead of this goal being a motivator, it was more so an impossible height to reach no matter what they did, thus making even more people at the studio resign from the project because they felt like they had a better chance finding work somewhere else and roll the dice with another game rather than try to achieve an impossible Metacritic score that some Deep Silver executive thought of on a whim. Despite all of this, Deep Silver had to pretend to remain confident to the public regarding this game and double down that people will enjoy it. During this period, there was one last sizable delay of the game from February 2022 to August of 2022. This might not seem out of the ordinary until you realize what really happened behind the scenes. The anonymous Volition dev explained this delay as a Hail Mary desperation move. Quote, "The second delay the public saw, pushing the game from February to August, was because so many people had left the studio that finishing the game on time was simply not going to happen. Frankly, and like most games, it's a small miracle it got out the door at all." When the source was asked about how Deep Silver and Embracer Group was handling all of this bad news, he went on to say the following, quote, "Deep Silver, as a publisher, should really stick to publishing mid to lower budget games. I really do not say that as an insult or a negative, but they really struggle to effectively publish and market larger games. For proof of this, go watch the reveal for Saints Row 2022 on Deep Silver's channel, if it's still up. It was absolutely plagued with issues. Also, after the reveal, the links to pre-order the games in the US market did not work for days. Regardless of your thoughts on pre-ordering games, properly marketing means giving the consumer the option to purchase it the moment it's announced. See, now this was something the fanbase had known for months, leading up to the game's launch. We all criticized how poorly the game was being marketed by Deep Silver, whether it was poorly made trailers, being snarky and rude to the fans, and hiring a very incompetent community manager. This was something the Saints Row fans felt from the very beginning of this entire disaster. And when the game did eventually come out, it did in fact have that barely made it out the door feel to it. Constant bugs, glitches, crashes, soft locks, poor writing that was all over the place, a general tone that simply didn't know what it wanted to be from the jump, and flat out terrible characters. Thus, the game did not hit the Metacritic score that Deep Silver assigned as the goal months prior. It did, however, do decent commercially at first. It was the second best-selling game for all platforms of August 2022 in 1 week, although it quickly dropped to 7th place in just under a month after release. The general sentiment from Embracer Group was that the game didn't hit the target sales they were expecting. This was a decent hit to take as the game started development in 2017 and went on for 5 years, costing Embracer an estimated $100 million. And with the constant rewrites of the story and scrapping of missions, I don't think that helped the budget at all. Saints Row 2022 was, without a doubt, an absolutely horrible game. That being said, said, it's still shitty for all the Volition employees that lost their livelihoods abruptly when the studio was shut down. The anonymous source had this to say about it, quote, "I do want to say that everyone I worked with at Volition was amazing. They really were a talented and dedicated group of people that really did want to make the best game they could. I assure you, no one was there to just collect a check. Everyone was giving it their best." And that's pretty much it. At this moment, it's unclear what the direction of Saints Row will be, considering Deep Silver still owns the IP. Whether they sell it off, start developing their own rendition in-house, or simply store the IP deep in the freezer of irrelevancy for it to slowly never be heard from again. That goes unseen as of right now. It was very interesting learning about the insider workings as to what was truly going on behind the scenes of this game. It sounds like this was something that was probably doomed from the very conception of the idea. Constant battles with Deep Silver because they wanted the reboot to be about friendship and whatnot, and just an overall identity crisis that this game had. I mean, I guess we can't blame everything on Deep Silver. Volitions were still the ones that cooked up the way the gameplay feels and things of that nature, but like I said, at least we have a bit more insight as to what the actual fuck was going on behind the scenes of this game. I am offering an open invitation to any ex-developer from Volition or anyone who has worked on a Saints Row game to feel free to hit me up if you wanted to clear anything else up for the fans. I will keep you completely anonymous if you'd like, so feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I think these kinds of things are crucial for fans like myself to understand what goes on behind closed doors that we'd never know until something is said. With all that said and done, thank you very much for watching. This has been your boy Mr. Papa RPG saying peace out, bitch.